and the other hashtag is my take, your take, all in small letters. Generation equality is one hashtag, and the other one is my take, your take. So we are happy to be here today, and you know that, as we all know, that the president was on air last night announcing the hygiene conditions to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. So for all of us to be safe, we want to encourage you to use the sanitizer, which is at the entrance, or you are free to go to the convenience rooms, which are just behind this curtain. Wash your hands, they say, for 20 seconds with soap and water. Be generous enough. If you do happen to sneeze or to cough, cover your mouth and nose with your elbow or tissue. That's when you cough or you sneeze. And then get rid of that tissue immediately. You can also then sanitize or wash your hands again to prevent the coronavirus being in this country. We also want to invite you to join the conversation. This year we are celebrating UN at 75 years of the United Nations existence. So at the back of the room, we have a computer where you can join the conversation and contribute to the change at the United Nations. Just 1 minute to fill out a survey and give us your opinions of what you think the United Nations should do over the next 25 years. So thank you so much. So in terms of today, generation equality, Zimbabwe has remained committed to the advancement of gender equality and women's empowerment, guided by the various international and regional instruments to which it is party. Central to this is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination, commonly known as CEDAW, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, the SADC Protocol on Gender and Development, and the Protocol to the African Charter on Women and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa, better known as the Maputo Protocol. However, real change has been agonizingly slow for most women and girls in the world, and I think a lot of women who are here will agree with that statement. Multiple obstacles remain unchanged in law and in culture. Women and girls continue to be undervalued. They work for more and earn less, and they have fewer choices, and experience multiple forms of violence at home and in public spaces. Today, we bring together the next generation of women and girl leaders and gender equality activists to engage in dialogue with the women's rights advocates and visionaries who were instrumental in contributing to the Beijing Platform for Action more than 2 decades ago. At this point in time, I want to introduce Maureen Marume, who is with UN Women, to give us opening remarks. So Maureen, if you can come forward.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, for gracing us, coming to this occasion. And I would like to welcome Honorable Mr. and Sekai. Thank you so much for coming in Namatai. My name is Maureen Marume, as said. I'm standing in for Delphine Seromanga, who is the country rep for UN Women. Hopefully my voice is loud enough. It's not. Oh. Yeah. So I'm standing in for Delphine Seromanga, who is the UN Women country representative in Zimbabwe. So this morning, I'm just here to welcome everybody. I don't know how many of us were born or alive back then in 1995. So 25 years ago, women from around the world came together for the 4th World Conference for Women, and they came up with a progressive roadmap, the Beijing Platform for Action that was mentioned, with looking at 12 critical areas and giving guidelines in terms of what could be done to reduce barriers to prevent women from achieving opportunities. So, you know, despite the progress that has happened in the last 25 years, we've gone back in some areas and we've even regressed in some. there's still a big gender pay gap in the labor force. Intimate partner violence is still very high. I think we all know the statistics around us. In terms of 1 in every 5 women still spend so much more time on unpaid care work. I remember a few weeks ago, I was in Mbire. We are doing some work in Mbire, and we had men and women talking about GBV. And one of the big things the men were talking about when they were complaining about women actually not being there for them, they kept on saying, when I come home, why does she keep on saying she's tired? What is she tired of? What has she been doing? If I come home and then she tells me she's tired. So when you're looking at things like that and you're trying to understand where men and women are coming from, and then when you're looking at HIV testing, the MIX survey that just came out a few weeks ago shows that among the 15 to 24 age group, women were testing higher at 53% and men only 36% for people who tested in the last 12 months when the mix was done. So you can see already the disparities in terms of the women that are going for testing and the men that are going for testing, 53% versus 24%. So whilst we are looking at this, women in poor households are almost 4 times more likely to get married at the age of 18. Access to education is one of the big determinants that prevents girls from getting married too early. So when we are now looking at UN Women now, this year, 25 years later, is launched the Generation Equality Campaign. And I think when we're looking at what the Generation Equality Campaign is about, it's about taking stock of progress. Where did we come from? Where were we 25 years ago? For us to be able to move, to go forward, we need to understand and appreciate where we came from. And I think this is what today's discussion is all about. To understand and appreciate the activists that were there before us that actually started. For some of us, we were born, I think I was 16 in 1995, thereabouts. We didn't understand much. For some of us, we grew up in a different world, so we don't understand where they've come from. Another activist I was speaking to a few weeks ago was saying in the 80s, early 80s, when she bought her first house, she needed a brother to come and sign the papers because women couldn't buy a house on their own. So for the younger people here to understand exactly where we have come from, I think we have the activists, the ones who were instrumental in actually pioneering where we are today. And then it's very important for us not to take things for granted, but to understand and appreciate where we have come from and how far we're going. So I think in conclusion, I would like to say maybe UN Women is calling for everybody in all our different spaces. I think we have the power to engage, to start conversations, to encourage gender equality wherever we are, in all the spaces we have. Now we have social media, we have all these things that we can actually use with the person sitting next to you, with anyone in your house, the things that actually prevent women from realizing their full potential in decision making. Women participating in politics and decision making, women actually having equal opportunities in terms of access to economic opportunities, and then women actually being free from gender-based violence. So in all our spaces, each of us has got a chance to actually start that conversation. So I think thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and I am here also to learn and to hear from the pioneers that started the process. So I think I wish everybody fruitful discussions, and I hand this over to Namatai and Sekai.
Thank you very much, Maureen. We can give her a round of applause. She was pretty young when Beijing happened. I actually went to Beijing, and I was younger then. Yes, I was there, so I'm actually excited to be part of this process. So 25 years ago, the Beijing Platform for Action set out to remove the systemic barriers that hold women back from equal participation in all areas of life. As part of this year's commemoration, UN Women is calling on all women and men of all ages and from across the globe to be part of generation equality and tackle the unfinished business of empowering women. Youth, as well as veteran women's rights activists, are key stakeholders and audience for this campaign. Intergenerational and multi-generational exchanges, perspectives, and solidarity are an important part of generation equality. This dialogue is expected to explore current issues related to women's rights and gender equality, to showcase the views and experiences of youth, as well as those of veteran activists. Young people shape the narrative by interviewing a veteran activist. This is what we're going to see today. So who are these people? We have Mrs. Sekai Holland. She is to my immediate right. She is a woman who has dedicated her life to campaigning for human rights, democracy, and the empowerment of women. A courageous and inspirational work was recognized in 2012 with the Sydney Peace Prize. She is a former Zimbabwean Co-Minister of State for National Healing, Reconciliation, and Integration. She has contributed to help advancing peace building and healing processes in Zimbabwe using innovative strategies to better incorporate traditional Zimbabwean cultural beliefs and practices with local, regional, and international best practices. Currently, she is the chairperson of the Board of Trustees for the Zimbabwe Peacebuilding Initiative. She's also chairperson of the Board of Trustees of Zimbabwe Women in Politics and Peacebuilding, and co-patron of Midland State University Fundraising Committee. On my far right, we have Namatai Kwekweza. She represents the crop of upcoming activists who are working to increase young women participation in leadership. She is a Zimbabwean activist who is also a renowned public speaker. She is using her influence to enhance youth leadership. She is also a founder of We Lead, a movement of emerging and accomplished individuals conscious of a need to support a generation of women to lead, engage, and impact their communities sustainably. And now, let's just give them a round of applause. They have impressive CVs. I now want to hand over to Namatai for the My Take, Your Take dialogue.
That's all right. Thank you very much, Tafadzwa. Let's just clap hands for Tafadzwa. Yeah, let's just, thank you so much, Tafadzwa. All right. So the first thing that I want to just start with is to give a brief background of my understanding of the Beijing Plus 25. Now, for interest's sake, this happened in 1995. I was born close to 2000, so this is much older than me. And it's quite interesting then to be in a situation where we are having an intergenerational dialogue, an intergenerational conversation with Sekai Holland. So just a brief background of what the Beijing Plus 25 is all about. We understand that in 1995, women went to Beijing, China, and basically, it was about, the representation of women. It was about the rights of women. It was about ensuring that generally worldwide, women would get, an equal representation to that which men were just enjoying and they had reserved for themselves. So basically, the conversation was about claiming the space for women and girls around the world. And of the crop of women who went to Beijing in 1995, we have since learned that since then, because it's now 25 years that this has happened, where are we as the world? Where are we in the different continents? Where are we as women? You realize that on the 31st of October 2000, the United Nations Security Council had a resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. And this was basically an acknowledgement that violence and conflict affect men and women differently. And when we talk about violence, we cannot just talk about physical violence, but we have to talk about economic violence. We have to talk about structural violence. We have to talk about political violence, cultural violence, violence in all its forms. And these things affect men and women differently. Next up, in 2015, the United Nations Security Council also came up with the resolution 2250, which focused on youth, peace and security security. And basically it acknowledged the unique role that young people play in the peace-building narrative. And in this particular resolution, young women are also part of youth. So basically young women are coined in both the resolution 1325 on women and girls, as well as the resolution on youth. They play well into that intersection. Now, in 2015, we also had the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's 5 years past that. One of the most interesting is SDG number 5 on gender equality. Where are we as different continents, as different countries, in terms of making sure that we have made strides in terms of empowering our women and girls? So what we realize is that 25 years past Beijing, we haven't made much progress. In fact, we have actually seen some relapses. For instance, currently in Africa, we do not have not even one single female head of state. But at some point, we had your Ellen Sirleaf Johnson, we had Joyce Banda, but now we don't have a female head of state currently as we speak. In terms of countries making documents, like our own country in Zimbabwe, we have our constitution stipulating gender parity, 50-50 representation. But look at it, the president is a man, the 2 vice presidents are men. In political parties, where are we standing? So in our conversation, as we think global, let's also think local as a country. Where are we in terms of the commitments that were made in Beijing 25 years later? Where are we? So basically, this is just the background of my understanding as a young woman on Beijing Plus 25. So now I will quickly dive into the following questions for my icon, Sekai Holland. I was telling you that it was very impressive for me to meet her again this time around, because these are the women who made a lot of contributions which are scarcely documented and celebrated. But they made a significant amount of contributions. So my first question to you, Mrs. Holland, is when and why did you join this field of work? When we were talking earlier, she said that you don't join, you're born into it. So let's hear what she will what she will say about this particular question. Over to you, Mrs. Holland.
No, thank you very much. I really appreciate. There's a young man here who wrote me and rang me, and I thought it was a hoax, Itai. And told me I was going to be in an intergenerational conversation. I thought, wow, what's that? I asked, when? March 18. Today is not a very good day for myself. And I want to start this by saluting the people of Lusaka 45 years ago, when on March 18, our leader and chairperson of the party, Herbert Chitepo, was brutally assassinated. We were the youth of the party at that time, and as children well brought up, we made the decision that we would withdraw from the liberation movement and allow the new process to move forward. But we were the people who laid the foundation of the international struggle against racism, for the mainstreaming of the African agenda into the global agenda. I also want to salute the people who were tortured with me on the 11th of March in 211, because today is the day when a whole lot of coordinated, very brilliant work led by my brother-in-law, who was here when I was tortured, and my husband, who was outside the country doing a consultancy, got together and finally got us to be flown out of the country for a 1-year treatment, because I had to get myself back together and come back home and do what I love doing best. I also want today to salute, because today on March 18th in 2015, I had a press conference at the new headquarters of the MDC renewal team. We had decided that the MDC we founded, and it was founded on women's backs, was no longer doing what we wanted it to do, and different waves left, and ours was the final group to leave, and I was invited as chair of the Guardians Council, which I was the founding chair of. I was asked to lead the party for 1 year, and exactly 1 year later, I made my press conference to leave politics for good and go back to civil society. So March 18 is not a nice day for me. That's why I'm dressed the way I am, because it's a very sad day, but Itai lifted that gloom by inviting me to be here today. Thank you very much. So your question, when did I join this field of work? There's no African child my generation who joined anything. We were born into families where we were groomed under Ubuntu to take roles in society, where we had responsibilities, duties, and where we also had rights. It's a myth that there are human rights fighters, human rights defenders to my generation, because we were born into a culture that had very clearly defined rights for everybody inside the family, in the community, and in the general, where people were meeting together. I suppose it is correct to say people are human rights fighters, activists, because of the colonial way which came and imposed itself without recognizing that people had their own ways of doing things and got us all going in different directions, which I call the atomization of our society. And that is where we are today, in the complete and full thrust of atomization, where there's complete confusion. So I didn't join this. I was born into a life where we were groomed to know that we were women, they were men, we had responsibilities, we had duties, but we also had guaranteed rights.
That's really wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Yes, and then I will quickly move on to my next question, which is what has been the biggest change for women in Zimbabwe since the Beijing Platform for Action was adopted?
Right. As I told you, these questions were done without consultation. Because, you know, Beijing, for us, was something that we had worked for from 1974, when Julius Nyerere came to Australia in 1974. And he was the first leader from another country invited to Australia to just interact with the Australian government, which was the first Labour government in 26 years. And he came with the message of the liberation struggle. And when he looked at the demonstrators, he picked the black ones, yours truly. And he invited us back to Africa to work in Africa, because they were setting up new structures. And the technocrat for that was a Zimbabwean, Herbert Chitepo. He was the chair of all the liberation movements by election. So when they left, they made us promise that we would invite him to Australia, because there were some changes which needed to be done. ZANU was known as a terrorist organization, but there were 6 authentic liberation movements. It was ANC, Frelimo, SWAPO, ZAPU, MPLA, and PAIGC. And the PAC, ZANU, all those others were seen as terrorist organizations. So when Chitepo was invited to Australia, the first thing the Australian Parliament did was to change the law where ZANU was a terrorist organization and recognize him as coming as the chair of all the liberation movements. Our history is not documented, so there is a lot of confusion about who done what. So when he left, the Indian government, Indira Gandhi, invited him to India, where he stopped, and he was again there as chair of all the liberation movements, accorded what would help all the liberation movements to work in Asia. That was in 1974. We were then invited, 73, we were then invited to Africa in July. I'm telling you, Tanzania was just the most incredible experience. I had left Zimbabwe in 1964, and now in 1974, I was in Africa for the first time with a husband and a 16-month-old son. And we were there witnessing what Pan-Africanism was, because at that time, the 6th Pan-Africanist Congress was held there. I'm sorry to give you this background, but I need to answer that. Then I was invited to become a representative of ZANU, which I accepted. And I was then sent to Gothenburg in Sweden with MPLA, Maria de Jesus, to represent the liberation movements from Africa on the new process for Mexico. In Gothenburg, I went with my husband, my son, and myself, and Maria de Jesus. We were shocked that the Russian delegation, where our colleagues from Zimbabwe, was represented entirely by 16 men. When we challenged them about why there were only them there, they started telling us about how men and women and this and anyway, we challenged them. And we were not able to then go to Mexico as ZANU, because of course our chair on 18th March had been killed, and there was complete chaos. But in Mexico, Olivia Mchena and Jane Ngwenya, Comrade Jane Ngwenya, were in Mexico. So Zimbabwe has always been in the process towards Beijing. Now, when we got home, I was invited by Mrs. Mtero to help her to restore the women's clubs, because the white women had dissolved the women's clubs, which were started by African women in the 30s as a conduit for development, because women were actually excluded from education. Anyway, we changed the name African Women's Clubs, started by Helen Vera in 1938, to African Association of Women's Clubs. And a lot of work was done to actually mainstream the demands of grassroots women into the equity, growth with equity, which came with ZimCode in 1980. So I'm giving this background because most of the women in the movement don't know this. There was always a struggle between 1890 and whichever way we are in, because in 1890 the pioneer column came and caused great confusion in not recognizing there were people there and introduced their own way of living. By excluding that, the struggle has always been for us to mainstream our own beliefs, which were positive from Ubuntu, so the thing went well for everybody. Anyway, I was answering you about Beijing. That for us, Beijing was something we had been working towards from 1974 in Gothenburg, preparing for Mexico, 1975. The preparations for Beijing were so fastidious under the new government. They were just brilliant. I was the secretary for communications as a lecturer at ZIMCO. And the delegation from Zimbabwe was well organized. It was totally intergenerational. It had everybody. And the Association of Women's Clubs had 9 grassroots women representing all the provinces. And when we got to Beijing, we made an agreement to leave them in Kenya. Oh, I'm talking about now something else, sorry. But it's okay, it's okay. We were preparing for Beijing. So we left them in Kenya with Wangari Maathai to learn how to do the Kenyan basket and how to grow moringa so that the animals here ate. So we were with this process at every institutional level, and Zimbabwe was the best organized country there was. I'm not now patting myself on the back, but people here at that time were well coordinated and well working together. Yeah. So your question can now proceed, because what were you asking?
What has been the biggest change? Yeah, no, it's a generational thing. Yeah. So what has been the biggest change for women in Zimbabwe since the Beijing platform?
Right.
Yes.
The biggest change for me is to walk into a room and see women. I've got the thing here. And we have to name people and put faces to people. I think the biggest change today, I want to start today as we go back. Every day you open the paper, there is really brilliant news. Sibongile Moyo, Managing Director, Nedbank Zimbabwe, and you think, wow. Precious Nika, Chief Executive Officer of Lafarge, brilliant. We celebrate. Clara Mlambo, Chairperson of, you know, the corporate world is taking people according to meritocracy. And that needs to be celebrated. Number two, I meet people like yourself. I'm meeting young people, and I just really find it so brilliant, boys and girls, who, in the middle class I'm talking about, who really have achieved what our parents tried to do. But we're not aware the grandchildren, like yourself, will be so brilliant, and that we celebrate. However, when we came from Beijing, imagine, 1995, with our grassroots women, again, we always took the 9. I must salute the Norwegian People's Aid, because they sponsored us right through the summits and to take the grassroots women. When we arrived, I was told, you've been gazetted. I said, what is that? And we kept going to the club, AWC. And they said, don't you know what gazetting means, though? So my husband arrived from Brazil, and his fellow whites had said to him, you know your wife is going to jail. She's still going to the club and she's gazetted. So he says to me, are you aware you are a criminal? You've been gazetted, you're not allowed to go to the clubs. So the PVO Act had been passed while we were in Beijing, and the first organization to be struck down was the Association of Women's Clubs. The only tool women had for progress. And I said, let me go home to Bulawayo and talk to my mom. And I heard the most horrific story there, that Helen Vera, before she was 30, the colonial government went to Murewa, where she was married, and took all her club's books and said she had stolen money. And the books were kept here in Salisbury, in the Ministry of Finance. And she died not knowing that they discovered that not only were these the best kept books in the colony, but the money was very well kept. So my mother said, you will never succeed in the clubs where there are men. They won't allow you to get rural women actually open-eyed because they have other function. Anyway, we were very lucky. My husband said to me, now, you've soiled our name. Holland, now I'm a thief. Yeah, oh. And the 18 women, including Opam Chinguri's mom, who was the chair in Manyikaland, our husbands just told us, clean our names. So we went to the Supreme Court with Beatrice Mtetwa as our lawyer. There's a story to that. And she brought us a blind advocate. We thought, now we are going to lose this, until my husband told me, this is the most brilliant advocate in the world. And so dubiously we went, and we won after 3 years. The section which gazetted us was struck down on the basis that the Minister for Social Welfare had no power to remove elected officials without charging them, and actually us going to court and all that and all that. But what we did after that was restructure the clubs and go out and meet other people who wanted to start a political process, so that we formed an opposition which would actually bring multi-party democracy in the country. And we left the clubs with specific instructions not to get involved in any political process that we started. So for me, Beijing was a big tragedy, because we came very excited, and the tool which had taken us there was removed from us. And we were removed from it for 3 years. So we lost 3 years while the court was going on. But we were working towards a new party coming up. But what's happened then, and I want women to catch this one. Patriarchy in Africa is at different levels. And what is tragic is that women get into fights because each patriarchal manifestation can throw anything at you and you want to argue. The thing is for people to know who they are. Ziva Jauri. You are a black woman, you are an African, you live in Africa, you are in a culture where humanity began. There is even an argument about our civilization. Every human came from Africa. We are told by the Western people. So of course we are the ones who are the mothers of civilization. And we should be proud of that. We should not be people who are stigmatized with slavery, with this thing, with that thing. So there's then the level of that our own culture was changed, where the African males under colonialism were given powers which they did not have in traditional society. We need to unravel those things. So for those people who keep saying to me, when are you writing a book? The book is nearly done, because you had to actually work through all the different strata to bring what people going forward in Africa should be looking at. So while Beijing has given us corporate success, in politics, which is where the power lies, we are struggling because there is not the academic input by African women to make us really work through the different strata of patriarchy, where we are dealing with our own and where we as African women should be going. That's what I want to say there, because it's something that really needs us to have 6 workshops where we take the different brands of patriarchy as they manifest themselves through time, for us to now read from the same page.
That's really wonderful. Thank you so much for that insight. And I think that, you know, the worst thing about what we are doing here is that you just have maybe 30 minutes, 45 minutes just to have a conversation. But there's so much in the way of history that connects with the conversations leading to the Berlin platform and post the Berlin platform. But otherwise, thank you so much for that intricate response. And the next question would be, what hasn't changed yet for women after the adoption of the platform, which you touched on a little bit, but also maybe you can just hammer into that a bit more.
The person who I am very sad not to see in these things is Olivia Mchena. And I think Stembiso should be here as well, because when we came from Australia, where I had lived for 17 years, married there, came back with a family and children, my degree is in film and television planning and production, camera and editing. I was filming the World Council of Churches in Melbourne for my final to get my master's qualifier. And I was so excited with my footage. Olivia was there. As I crossed the road, I was hit by a car. There went my film. And I was in hospital for 11 months. It seems 11 months in hospital is the story of my life. So I wasn't home for independence. I was in hospital. But when we arrived back, Olivia came to see me in Australia, in Sydney, in my house with all the bandages. So when I came back, the first person, of course, I saw was Olivia and Stembiso at UZ, telling me about what we had to look out for in the work that was to be done here. What was interesting with their take was that they actually had a trajectory of how women ought to work in this environment to go forward. Because the church, and Olivia represented that, had done a lot in colonial times to offer a tool for women to move forward. And she represented that. Stembiso was from a place called Ehlewini in Bulawayo, where skills were taught. It's not there anymore. And she was talking about the kind of NGO that we ought to have in this country to move on. She started ORAP, which is what gave us the insights when Maimtero came to my house after getting my husband to Zimbabwe, who was not allowed to come, because when I came in 1980 with my husband, after 3 months, he was told to get out. We didn't know he had to get out. Why? Because if you were married to a foreigner as a woman, you had to go to your husband's home. Also, okay, he left in a huge aeroplane as the only passenger, which had left 500 Australian teachers, different technocrats we had asked for who we sent. But this is the story here, that I then had to actually open a bank account, get a new passport, because I didn't have one. When Rhodesia was on sanctions, I was traveling on a UN document. And they said to me, bring your husband. I said, you just sent him out. They said, bring your brother. My brother was the minister for the public service at that time. So he wrote me a letter to go and have my passport and then to open a bank account. And when I tried to open the bank account in a joint account with my husband, which is how we always did things, so no, but where is he? We need his signature. The situation was extremely hard for women here. So I launched into a fight to bring my husband back, which took me 12 months. And you had to actually use very untraditional methods. A book is coming on those things. But he came after 1 year, and we moved forward. So when you say what hasn't changed, it's the power matrix. They will never change until women have clarity about what the issues are intergenerationally, to see what the gains done by women, gains done by men and women together. Because there are some which we do together and we get through the COPAC process, the ONRI process, the JOMIC process. A lot was done. And it's good that Honorable Misia Hairabu is here, because the work we did was totally genderized. And I remember when we launched in Sheraton with the former President Mugabe, our organ for national healing, reconciliation, and update. The president being so proud that there was the chair, John Gomo, there was this Spanda, and he said, and we were clear that we had to genderize, and we have Mrs. Holland. To me, it was not a praise, actually, it was a put down, because I thought I was there on merit. Only to be told I was only there as a woman. So, until women are sensitive to words and what they mean, whether they are actually praising you or putting you down, that sensibility has been lost. I would like, for example, to bring people up to speed, because we are Eurocentric, is to read Germaine Greer, the female eunuch, Kate Millett, Sexual Politics, all the different feminist writers who actually wrote about their society. So you actually get an appreciation when you do your makeup and do your stuff, whether you are beautifying yourself or soiling yourself according to what things should be. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. That's a very powerful submission. Yeah.
And then, level number 2, I meet people who will say to me, why are you dressed like that? Vazukuru. This is how Africans dress. They say, wait, no one else is dressed like that. So that's why you need to do things intergenerationally. Number 3, people really need to appreciate that African civilizations across the continent, Ubuntu is a philosophy you must actually understand. Like it or not, you must understand Ubuntu, because it's the only philosophy among civilizations which takes a holistic approach to humans, to what is on the planet, and gets people to relate holistically.
That's really impressive. Thank you so much for those powerful submissions. And I just really wanted to maybe reiterate the point on the power metrics and the need for appreciating, the history of the women's movement and the feminist movement across generations. Because what's quite interesting is that when I first learned about feminism in depth, it was a training done by Bella Matambanazo in Bindura. Mm-hmm. And, she talked about it from the 1930s. I was like, in the 1930s, women were already mobilizing, because sometimes as young women, in terms of our interventions, we only think maybe for from 2000, because that's when I started existing. But there's a lot more work that actually happened. And we can't then, take over and continue the work if we don't actually know what were the gains.
No, it goes before the 30s. It goes through to, the suffragites. It goes way beyond. But I think what I'm trying to say to everybody, you must understand that African women are really born as people in the Ubuntu culture. Men are not allowed to oppress women. They're not. If a man puts a finger on you, the brothers immediately are called, they take you away, and the talks start to take place to correct that. No. This is not the point I want to make. We had big fights with the feminists, the Western feminists. Germaine Greer, all those, we had big fights. They wanted us to become Ms. Sekai Holland. We said, no. I am Mrs. Sekai Holland, because in my society, among the Shonas, Ndimai Kudzo, among the Ndebeles, Ngumasiziba. So, we don't want to lose our identity when we go back home by saying Ms. Because who you are in your society is a place that is respected. Whatever your status is, if you are childless like me, I've adopted kids. Basara tete, basara mai vai vasina mwana. It's to look after your brother's kids and those that have fallen through the cracks. And you have a title. This thing of putting women down who are barren, who miscarry. I've had 8 miscarriages at 6 months. Who miscarry, and it's a category of women who are not understood, miscarriers. This putting down of those people, it's a new phenomenon, which actually manifested itself in the time I was growing up myself. Those women were given their place of respect. So, feminism in each society must take its own form. It cannot be universal. It's cultural imperialism for people to come to Africa and to say, you should be doing this. And then we had big fights on homosexuality. We said, and on abortion, we said, we come from a society where taboo rules everything. So we don't argue with you that homosexuality exists in Africa. Because these are things that are not talked about. Each family deals with those things in its best way. But we were told all sorts of abuse words. And today I listen to the AU being attacked, and our men fail to say, people, let's have dialogue on cultures and where we've come from. And let's agree on how we change our laws universally, locally, according to what the situation we face in our own society. We felt very abused by the way in which discussions have taken place between and among Africans. Okay, feminism is from the 18th, 19th century as Western women fought for a place in their own society. And we got hooked in to actually establish that African women were feminists by birth, by the roles they were given in their society, but that the colonial society had brought so many changes dictated by them without discussion. So we needed that discussion to start. So I want to congratulate UN Women for terming these conversations, because abantu bayaxoxisana, vanhu vanotaurirana. It's an African tool that is used every day, all the time, and which has now been abused by saying dialogue, because that's again a Western way where people sit, oh, this one represents this, oh, people are talking all the time, every day, and the thoughts come up to where you then are.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Holland. All right, so I'll quickly dive on to the next questions. I'm going to compress this too for the sake of our time. The question is, what progress has been made regarding women's contribution to peace building and national healing, as well as what are the opportunities for younger generations to contribute to the realization of women's rights?
That one I want to say to you, I've spent the past 4.5 years producing the Great Zimbabwe Peace Building Initiative to a civil society add value to our baby as the organ, the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. We gave birth to that. Unfortunately, I have to say this. I wish the 5 men were here. Priscilla, you should go and tell them what I said. When we had now made our recommendations, Patriarchy raised its ugly head. It was not a Western head, it was a local one. We had recommended, people don't love Priscilla, please. When we had now finished, and I had 2 ailing men, my chair and my uncle Gibson Svanda, we had that our recommendation that the chair of the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, which we recommended, should be somebody from the people. It should be a man or a woman with heart who understands kusutisana fodla, ukukumelana umlota, which the Western people call mediation, negotiating, and dispute resolution. Because that is the core of African civilizations. It is based on truth, justice, and forgiveness as the basis of reconciliation. And we put that as the core of the process in Zimbabwe. So it gets to the men. I don't know how you were done. You can explain to them, and I would like you to how you did it. We had now, oh, they've changed. The president called us. They are now saying the chair should be a judge with 7 years experience. I said, who did that? Chinamasa, Monzora, Mangwana, Anunzanwe Kwedunube, Nabiti. We said, no, it can't be a lawyer because the thing will now go to money. My toe was hit. How much will it take me to be? Because healing is about heart. And it's about acceptance after people tell the truth. Ngozino Ripka does not mean 100,000. I was tortured, I want 100,000. It's about restoration of dignity. A person recognizing you. Do you see me? Uyangibona na? Uyangizwa? Do you hear me? That is where healing starts. Anyway, because they changed it, the NPRC, it's limping. So this thing that we have put out as an NGO is to get what we tried to do with John Gomo and with Gibson Spanda. Try to do it at the grassroots level so that what the NPRC comes up with legally is fine. So we are addressing what we see was something that was done konangapo e management ye Kopak. Selipumisa ma paper. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Thank you. So I'm not embarrassed to say these things. They have to be said for people to understand why certain things are not working. Patriarchy intervened and derailed our process.
Thank you so much for that.
Does it make sense?
Makes a lot of sense, yes. And the next question was the opportunities for younger generation to contribute to realization of women's rights. Yes.
We have launched with Helen Clark in October when she was here. She's 8 years younger than me, so we've known each other all our lives from the anti-apartheid days. So when she came, with great difficulty, where we had to intervene and get her papers done properly, we launched the Boy Child Project because there's no way in which in Africa you can have a successful girl-child program without a boy-child program. It has to be there, a boy-child program. It's at UZ and at MSU, where I'm a co-patron, it is there as the Girl-Child Project. These two are directed at the children, boys and girls, that have fallen through the cracks, to connect with the Italians who have done very well in life and to take the world forward. What we have set up is just a mechanism which is very easy to read and to move forward with. So for grandmothers in traditional society, Your place was to sit by the fireside, which I do with my grandchildren. There's no fireside, but they get an ear knock from Gogo because there are certain things I want them to know before I close my eyes. Our job was to just talk, because African civilizations are the only ones which have got a place for the dead. Amadlozi. Hayi ubuhle bamadlozi vukuzenzele. Sithembile said. Hayi ubuhle bamadlozi vukuzenzele. Midzimu yakanaka asiwewe sumuka uzviitire zvinhu. Christians, God is there looking after us. But stand up and use the gifts he gave you to get on with life. So what we need to get people to understand is that Africa is the mother of life, is the continent where life began. And 70,000 years ago, the first came away to Australia, their Aborigines. Others went across. This is what Western people tell us. So if it's like that, I think the fight for peace, for me, is over saying to the world, how do you then disrespect your mother country, where you came from? People should try and understand the place of Africa. Right now, you know, the corona. Unfortunately, it's hitting everyone, and I don't know how many of us here will come away safe. We've been told not to come together. But people are not in Africa asking, why has it come here so late? We are being told all sorts of things which are obviously nonsensical, because we, the owners, are not wanting to find out. Where are our scientists here in Africa to say, by the way, we haven't caught it now, we should do this so we don't catch it at all? Where are they? I know where they are. We have been so demoralized by the colonial process and so confused, we don't even know where to begin with this struggle.
Wow. Thank you for that. Wow. Wow. Yes. I think maybe the final question, because of our time, I won't add anything or reiterate there, is where do we go from here?
From here, remember one thing when you leave this room. If you haven't done so, go talk to your mom and your dad to find out who you are. Look for your grandma and your grandpa. Talk to them to find out who you are. As soon as one person dies in African families, the next replacement is put in front of your eyes, and you are told, our family structure is still intact. Talk to them. Charity begins at home. We have a job to actually get our act together. Life is not yet done with us. Then you can now talk about, hey, Holland, but find out for yourself who you are. Whatever you find out, it's your roadmap to knowing what to correct and how to link with others. So in our program, the Great Zimbabwe Peace Building Initiative, if you come and work with us, the first thing you do is go and find out from your mom and your dad. They are there, even if they are dead. You were given. And your grandparents and your clan. And you have a project in your mother's home and in your father's home and in your home to get Zimbabwe back on its feet and running. However, I shouldn't demoralize you. The President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Emmerson Mnangagwa, has got some brilliant frameworks of policy. We know, because we made a resolution, that as an NGO, we work with the government of the day. And we move away from the NGO of attacking any government all the time and getting foreigners actually attacking the government. People don't realize that by that happening, we are putting ourselves down, because that is our government in place right now. Anyway, just a bit of history about him. When I was in Lusaka then, on the day that I was leaving, the chairman said to me, we have taught you over 7 months what you're going to do in Australia, in Asia. I had the biggest, I was the ZANU rep in the biggest global cut myself. So He says, what didn't we tell you? I said, you've been teasing me to say that. And Tongogara was sitting there. He called me Comrade Sisi. You've been telling me you caught him in a restaurant because of his height and his agility and sent him to China for training. I want to meet people from home who came here after being involved at home. They both laughed. We used to have the most wonderful times, people. Tiribariki. I was 31 at that time. So the next day I was told to come at 10 o'clock. And walked in this young man who only spoke with his eyes and his smile. I was introduced to him, and they went up. Nobody has actually told me what Chitepo told me about what Emerson Mnangagwa did at home. Nobody has actually ever said it. It was accolades. And so I said, so what's he doing? He said, we are training a group of ZAPU and ZANU technocrats and people who will go into politics. And this one, because he came from home, is one of the ones that we know. By 2000, when we go home, he will actually take the role of prime minister. At that time, it was an executive prime minister. And we will be taking the advisory role, because by 2000, what was it? They didn't think we would be home by the 1900s. They thought the war would take up to then, because he used to say, so we will need to soften those brains and they go home properly. So this Emerson never said a thing. He just kept looking up and smiling, and you would never connect that talent with the person he was sitting down there with. So when we came home, and my brother Richard, who I had lived with in Lusaka, he was in the Politburo, and they had removed him, and Simpson, they were the original degreed people in the Chimurenga General, in the Darere Chimurenga. So when Richard was dying, he called me to Gweru. And as I was leaving on the second day, I didn't realize how sick he was. He said, his son, Richard's son, is named after my young brother, Tinae Ove. Amehove. So he says, Richard, I want you to go and tell the boy not to rely on Mugabe to give him the presidency, because he will not. Tell him to start his own base and help him to set up that base. Nikati Tinae, meaning his son. No, he says, didn't Chitepo leave you with the Emerson? Nikati, oh, you want me to go to Emerson in ZANU-PF and tell him this horror? Anyway, I didn't, because it was nonsense to go and tell a person that. We did, however, realize that we needed to actually get Zimbabweans to understand that this war has got children who actually gave up childhood to liberate the country. And I want to use an example here. Chiwenga. And parents Shiri, don't laugh. And parents Shiri. When they were now kidnapped, we don't use the word kidnapped. When SB was kidnapped, we don't use that. We say when they were frog marched to the war from high school. Mount St. Mary's. We cried in Australia. Now, why are they taking children? But ZIPA had now been formed, and they were now wanting to get away from ZAPU and ZANU, and they wanted new children that would understand that Zimbabwe was one. Now, these children never had mother love. They didn't have the home cooking. That's who I now met in the camps. When I first met Charles Ndlovu, kuthiwa Webster Shamudi muthi Webster, and he was using Ndlovu, I thought, my babo, umzukulu wami. I said to Chitepo, why are we having these young kids in the camps? He said, excuse me? What young kids? Because the political was not allowed to go to the camps. And when Ndangana took me to the camps, because the students in Australia had raised money at Chitepo's request to buy a camp, 3,000 hectares in Lusaka, I was taken there to actually see what was there with Ndangana, Chigowe, and those were my uncles. So when you people today are putting your tweets about Sekai Holland, what I say to people is Kwanai. What happened was the first thing that traumatized us as youths. We were very well raised, and there were things which were taboo. And there are things that you will never say to anybody, however well you know what happened. Anyway, I was in Sydney when the chairman was killed. And I was really shocked to hear people saying to my husband, oh, sorry, your wife has died. And in the morning, the Sydney Morning Herald had headlines, Black Joan of Arc murdered in Lusaka. Sekai Holland with a beautiful picture of me. And I thought, how? I'm here in Sydney. When was I killed? And for 2 years, when I got out of my house, people would run away because they believed the story I had died and I was a ghost. Africans were very powerful people. We could do those things. So people don't laugh. So I'm saying, we carry, my husband and I of 54 years, we are here to do the work that was left by those who were killed. The writing of the history of the struggle is taking place. It will be complete from our perspective. And it is to say, war comes with every crudity. And for people to be hung up on wanting this and wanting that, when the owners of the thing haven't spoken, it's an abuse of us. When John Ngomo was about to die, the Australian people came here to give me the Sydney Peace Prize, which shocked me because I thought it was a hoax. He was interviewed, and I want to send this so you circulate what he said. He was asked by SBS, an Australian network, what do you think as a chair of this you want to leave as a legacy? He said, we in ZANU-PF want to leave a legacy where Zimbabweans are one. We don't know how to do it because we carry the burden of history. But we have here, my mother is Nkomo. We have here my niece, my grandmother is a Spanda, my uncle Gibson Spanda. We think what we have produced, the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, the Code of Conduct for Political Parties, he wanted to do a Code of Conduct for civil society. Remember, Lina Lali sends a Code of Conduct for communities. Those are the two things, Priscilla, which we are going to be doing to fulfill my uncle's dream. And we have reconnected with young women who remind me of me. And I was so thrilled to find that the spirit of fight is in all of you, but you are confused by colonialism. And every woman I meet, I know. Every boy I meet, I know. They have that spirit of building a Zimbabwe that will just be so brilliant for all of us. I know it's coming when I see my grandchildren, when I see all of you. But when you see those boys picking my paper, mu street, which is my boy child, and when you see those kids sitting in the mud and all that, those are entrepreneurs just like you, but they haven't had the opportunity. And what you should be doing is using your head, and it's very well functional, instead of looking in the, I'm now a grandmother. How is my hair? Look, look. Instead of doing that, look at the others and come up with plans that bring everybody up. We are one.
Powerful. Yeah, this is really powerful. Yes. Powerful stuff. Thank you so much, Mrs. Holland. And yeah, I've been asking you a lot of questions. It's now time for you to pose questions on your perspective on how young women can contribute to the realization of women's rights. Yeah.
Right, what I was going to say to this one, I see it as an abuse again. Do you know, every day when I get up, my worry is, and my husband's, hey, how long are we going to be able to really know who we are? My husband is a teaser. He says to me, do you know my name? Can you recognize me? Because we are scared of dementia. I'm 77. So, excuse me, it's not funny. It's a real thing. Mm-hmm. So, when I saw that I'm going to ask you questions, I said, are they crazy? My job is to tell you about the past. For you as young people to reconnect with your past and to tell me how you want to move forward and the information that you need from the past to get your roadmap clear. So I say to you, we have raised you so well, so brilliantly, that I have absolutely no worries that you are going to get it wrong. As I got it right, I know you've got it right, and that you will get it right for Africa.
Thank you so much. This is good stuff. So I think I'll just round up by just giving my perspective. I think maybe coming from different timelines, this has been so powerful for me. Yes. Of course. So coming from different generations and different timelines, it has been something very powerful. Understanding the intricacies of what colonization did, the intricacies of what the politics of this country did in the context of how the women's movement and the feminist movement was to become. And I would agree with you to then say that I'm always shocked when I hear that the people who went to war were as young as 13, 12. And yet, when we want to mobilize and run with something as young people, you can't get that as much. I was talking to other people from South America. They say they've got a very strong backbone on social movements. But in the context of how we mobilize, yeah, it has changed. So what you're saying is something very profound, because you were asking me, Kuti, where are the young people? Because in our time, she was telling me that when we're sitting back there, but in our time, we knew what we wanted and we're going to get it. But nowadays, we don't have that. So having sat here with you, just from my perspective and having talked to you, you know, in the background there, I think maybe the only thing that I can say is if we can take anything maybe from her generation, it is the spirit that you were talking about, the spirit of being able to fight, and the spirit of being able to you know, go after what we want. But the first thing, again, is to make sure that our heads are clear. Because the reason why, I totally agree with you, she was talking about dressing, to then say that even our manner of dress, we look more Western, we behave more Western. And these are some of the confusions that you can't even mobilize as young people, because we are so in love with everything Western.
No, with yourselves.
Yes, with me as well, yes. So, yeah, it's a very powerful thing, and I think that we should be having more of these conversations. And I just wanted to just thank you so much for sparing the time to share history with us. I think after today, we'll look at Emerson Mnangagwa differently. I think that's why they don't want us to talk to you, because they know you've got files. And you would tell us, no, he was just the guy who was looking across the room and smiling. So now we know. So, but thank you so much for sparing the time to come and share with us. I feel very enriched. I don't know about you. If you feel enriched, say Ubuntu. No, you guys, you can do better than that. If you feel enriched, say Ubuntu. Right. Thank you so much.
And also, love conquers all.
Yes.
If you do things without love in your heart, you will not get it right. So, my torture is one thing I wanted to say in 1 minute. I saw cartoons about me in the Daily News. Mind you, I'm going to get them one day. Asking me if I'd forgotten I was tortured. I'm the ambassador for Support Life After Torture. The headquarters are in Oslo. I don't play my titles at all, but I use them to get from A to B. When you have been tortured, you are supposed to be really embarrassed, to hide, to accept you did things wrong. But if you are clear about principle, about what needs to be done, and that torture is a tool that was introduced here in 1890 to put the Africans down, which every successive government here will use if it is not changed. I want you to go and Google and look at my interview with David Frost on Sunday on Al Jazeera. I wanted to play with David. I'm from the media. So when I'm being interviewed, I know the information I want them to remain with. He said, oh, your torture, and he played photos, very insensitive. People who have not been tortured and who have been tortured, who hold the Western way, that you therefore are owed something by society, upset me. Torture is a system in place that is put to shut people up. So I fight torture globally. So anyway, David Frost played my pictures when I was tortured, which I've never seen. And then he said to me, so what do you think about that? I said, oh, nothing. Why? I'm a minister now. My president has sent me here on a mission. He said, but Mugabe tortured. I said, no, he didn't. I was tortured by a system left in place by the colonialists. And let me tell you, David Frost, I would like to be the Minister of Home Affairs in a government of Morgan Tsvangirai, because I want to wallop Mugabe and all the people who've walloped us. Then we are going to change the law to outlaw torture. David Frost said, you mean you will torture anyone? I said, try me. He didn't even pick the joke. That my message was, torture is a system which both ZANU, ZAPU, everybody must work together to remove. So when I put out a press statement to say the abductions and the torture which was taking place last year, some of them were intra-party related. I was attacked by everybody, and I was asked to remember that I was tortured. I never answered, which upset a lot of people. But what I want to say to civil society and the UNDP, the UN system, civil society in Zimbabwe today, we are listening to echoes. We want to hear the voices of the actual people that are going through what we are trying to address. So we deal with voices, not echoes. And my take to you is lift every voice. Civil society tries to drown certain voices like mine. Unfortunately, we all are individuals with the right to express the world how we see it.
Thank you so much. Wow. This is impressive. Thank you so much, Mrs. Holland. I think that Itai is probably fuming because I know I went way over time. Yes, but this was powerful, and I'm quite certain that you guys would have wanted us to extend maybe for an extra 1 hour. Yes, so, but otherwise, okay, thank you so much, and I'll give back time to Tafadzwa for the plenary discussion. Maybe I could just ask, are we free to leave the stage?
Yes, let's leave.
Itai, are we free to leave?
Perhaps you could stay here just in case there are issues of people want clarity and what have you.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you so much,
Yes.
Tafadzwa and Mrs. Holland.
Namatai, yes.
Sorry.
Your name is
Namatai.
Tafadzwa.
My name is Tafadzwa.
Yes.
I was so engrossed in the discussion. It was very exciting. We are here at the My Take, Your Take intergenerational dialogue, and we have just been listening to Mrs. Sekai Holland and Namatai, giving their perspectives 25 years after the Beijing Platform for Action, in terms of where we can go, how we can move it forward, how we can move the dialogue forward, how as women we can even take it forward. And I liked what Sekai said. She said we need clear heads. Yes. We need to understand Ubuntu. We need to have our own definition of feminism, depending on where you are. It's not one definition. We need clarity. We need to also have our own principles. And above all, we need to have love. So thank you so much for this discussion. I now want to open it up to the floor. I know that you all do have something to say, to contribute to this discussion. As our audience, what do you have to say on this topic? What opportunities do we have that we can use for the remaining 10 years until 2030 to realize women's rights? What are the opportunities, what are the hanging fruits that we have that we can use as young women, as older women, to realize women's rights up to the year 2030 when the SDGs come to an end? So I'd like to take your interventions from the floor and we can have our discussions. Within the context of the Beijing Platform for Action, what are the opportunities that we already have that we can use up to the year 2030? Anyone?
Thank you very much. I think from my own perspective.
I'm sorry, if you can just identify yourself so we know who you are.
Okay, my name is Abigail Mpambi. I'm a human rights defender and of course a number of other portfolios. I'm really challenged, particularly from what Mrs. Sekai Holland has been actually revealing. But I think the ball also is in our cause as women. We have a lot to do, particularly by beginning to acknowledge and celebrate the achievements done by women. I remember my sister at some point, she sometimes tried to use these radical approaches. My sister, Honorable Misa Irambwi. Radical approaches to issue of women. At some point, I've been tracking her towards the 2018 elections, where she was using the radical paintless campaign. She's been trying to hammer on this issue of women, zeroing in down. But all I'm saying is, as women, are we not, in most cases, enemies of our own struggle? I have seen so many issues happening around women, and how many programs have we put in place to document and celebrate specifically the achievements that were done by women. Because most of the times, when we want to talk about women empowerment and women issues, we are documenting and saying we are concentrating on the negatives. Women do not have rights. Look at what happened to Maimjuru. Look at what they are doing to Zvanivani. Look at what they are doing to so much. Can't we also begin to turn the tables and motivate women by documenting and celebrating the achievements that were done by women? Particularly, look at what the history, just in an hour or less, what we are picking from my Holland. What they did, as my President Mr. what they did, the positives that can motivate other women to say, yes, we can. Yes, I can. Yes, I can even do it from as far as Bubi, from as far as Kitiatota. I can do something. I think now we need to focus on packaging the positives. The world is not prepared to buy any negatives. The world is not prepared to motivate us out of tears. Probably we need to motivate now ourselves out of saying, we can do it. She did it, I can. What about you? What about that one? So I think for now, we need probably as UN women, help us also to have these documentaries of the positives upon which we can be motivated. Because we have these files only about the negatives. Yes, negatives are there and they are wrong. But can we package the positives upon which we can build the women's struggle in the next generation? Thank you.
And it's good to see the point that you're making that Mrs. Holland has already started packaging some of those issues. So we look forward to the publication of your book.
No, it's not mine. Here we have got Mr. Machalaga, who is one of the people who was taken from Manama. Frog. Please, can you please just tell us? He is one of the people who were taken from Manama Mission. And it's.
But I was not
a teacher. You were a teacher.
I was not a pupil.
You were a teacher.
I was the teacher.
Please talk about it, please.
What do I talk about?
You are 1 minute.
No, I was the teacher on duty on that day.
Just tell us.
No, the people we are talking about, I were in Form 2, I think. Simsiso, SB Moyo, they call him Simsiso, and
that woman minister.
the Mabua, yeah, Chipo Chiratis, Matamvana. They are stars in the process. These are women. These are women who. I've gone. But I get abused by by this one. Can you say how you abuse me?
Confess.
Confess. Confess.
Smart women, stupid choices. He's got a brilliant wife.
No, thank you very much.
So when I see Chiwenga, when I see SB, people get annoyed with me because to me, they are the stars of the liberation struggle, all of them. And I just think that the failure of my generation is that we were so shell-shocked by the assassinations which were actually not internal. I see Doug Hammarskjöld here. He was killed in Ndola. The Rhodesians were accused. All the killings are globally connected, and they are still going on today. And until we understand that, we are going to be fighting among ourselves until we finish ourselves.
Thank you. Can we have some more interventions from the floor in terms of opportunities towards the year 2030? I see a hand raised up there. Can you assist? 2 hands raised up. You can introduce yourself and make your interventions short.
Thank you. My name is Ominda Msakra. I'm from YMCA. I just want to show or to notify what I've learned from the discussion. I've realized that it's not all about us getting the privileges. It's also about us equipping as women in terms of education. From what Ms. Sekai Holland was saying, it showed that she was already educated and she had the know-how of what was going on. And as women, it's not all about we are abused, we need our rise and order. We need to get down and dig deeper into our history and also to keep ourselves with academics. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tendai Chatikobo from Whispers. My contribution, well, before I say it, ma'am, I'm truly inspired by you. You are not celebrated enough, not at all. I just want to say to the UN women, something I'd like to see happening is more platforms being created for women to advocate for other women, because society instills a certain fear in us. When you say you want to partake in such movements, there is a part of society that tells you that, oh, now you want to get into trouble. So if we could educate girls, even within the school curriculum, because one day my daughter came from school and she said, Mommy, I need a list of 10 heroines. Do you know we had to scratch our heads, not because they don't exist, no, but because they are not celebrated enough. Because women are just taught to be, in that backstage and let the men go forward. So it becomes an area where a lot of people are capable, a lot of women are able to join us to make a change, but they can't because the fear is real. So if we could have more platforms where we engage with even younger girls, if the school curriculum could teach young girls and even boys that even a woman is worthy of being celebrated where she has merit. Thank you.
And just before we move on to the next intervention, I recall one of our panelists indicating that, I think it was Mrs. Holland, we have seen a relapse as we no longer have a woman head of state in Africa. And even in the presidium, in our own country, it's all males. So we also want to have this, make this contribution, looking at those issues. We have relapsed. What can we do to the year 2030? To to move the situation forward for women in Zimbabwe. We have a hand up here.
Hi, my name is I'm from and it seems as if you were actually in my life when you made a contribution. For me, I think the main issue is actually for women to dominate and get to the source of power. Because we might run in the streets, but if we do not have decision-making power, if we do not have influence, thank you. If women cannot control influence, if we do not have that decision-making power, if we do not have as many women as we can in cabinet and in the government, then we might have a long time also coming in the future for screaming and asking for rights and, you know, meeting in these places, making these conventions. So for me, it's also about having women possess the power and meaningful power, because there are some women who are in the corporate world who are maybe CEOs, but when it comes to decision making, the decision does not even lie within their offices. Also, I think the issue of documentation is really important. I remember I was having a conversation with Virginia Piri, and she was also reiterating this fact that women have been doing a lot ever since the pre-colonial era, but their stories and their contribution to feminism is not as documented as we want it to be. Also, we have to realize that certain discourses, especially when it comes to feminism, may not fit directly into our context, because we also have our own culture that has shaped who we are as a people. So just like any other policy is adapted and adopted, let us also make sure that certain discourses also speak to our culture. And then maybe lastly, I think what kept on ringing in my mind as Mrs. Holland was speaking was the issue of how sometimes as the oppressed, we want to take so much power so that we oppress the oppressor. But we also forget that the oppressor is also dehumanized and is a core part of the whole liberation process. So as women, let's also not just focus on bringing down patriarchy, but also bringing the whole system of bringing humanity back to the males, because they've also been dehumanized by the system of patriarchy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm Brighton Prince from Prince Inc. Organization. My question is, actually it's not a question, it's a contribution, whereby we talked about empowerment of women. I'm sorry, I'm not a woman, but I have to comment on that. You said there have to be economical empowerment. That one is the basis of all empowerment, according to my view. And to quote an American revolutionist, he said, true compassion is more than flinging a coin to a baker. It comes into a realization that the edifice that produces bakers needs restructuring. From that, what I want to reiterate much is we need a resolution, maybe within the United Nations, whereby there is practical there are resources that are located to those women with a vision. Because they might be having visions, but without action, it will go nowhere. Also, in English, they say vision without execution is hallucination. That is basically what it is all about. We need to be practical. We need women who are practical, empowered, because you will never go anywhere with motivation only. That motivation, you need to use it to execute something. So if you're just having it in your head and in your house, practically it will not bring anything. So as you look into 2030, I look forward to a situation or to whereby the United Nations come up with a resolution that actually support women in that particular case. Thank you very much.
Hello, good morning. My name is Junior Gambura. I'm from Roots Africa. I would like to thank Mrs. Sekai Holland for the information and the insights you have given us. Thank you, Namatai. And also, what I think going forward, as women, I think strides have been taken. Women are trying, but I think it's the real is the big head of patriarchy that is trying to dismantle the system. I think we have lots of unlearning to do. I think women are trying, especially Mrs. Holland was even indicating in the corporate sector, so many women are being celebrated. But I think in the political forefront, I think patriarchy is really dismantling the gains that have been done before. I think we are trying, but I think because of the whole system of patriarchy, women are being put in places where they end up fighting each other. But I think when we are in our own spaces, we think we need to unlearn so many issues. And I think we must take that culture is not static. We make culture, we are not made by culture. So I think as going forward, we need to unlearn so many things that have been there before for us to reach where we want to go. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I now want to bring the same question back to, just briefly.
Okay. My name is Clara Chinoruma, and I'm coming from Whispers. I'm representing a generation from Namatai, where we are very younger than Beijing itself, born in 96. What I'd really like to say is, I'd like to speak from a perspective where, as young women, as our generation, the younger ones, where we really, my mother here, Priscilla Miserambo, is always saying it's really not a struggle of you trying to take us out as the older generation. So I think the big take away home message for me is that we need the Priscillas, we need the Sekais to hold our hands forward, because we really feel like as the young women, we really need to eliminate them from our stories. I don't know how to put it across. It seems like we need to eliminate them. We feel like they're stopping us, they're blocking us, but really they're champions and they have not really been celebrated. Just sitting here, I've always had the head Sekai Holland, the name Sekai Holland, but the stories to her name really were never there because they were never taught. So for me today, this is like a light to really say we've never been taught to celebrate the bigger people in our lives as younger women. And that reflection on its own, its power on its own for me as a young black woman, as a young African woman. So for me, taking forward, when we are trying to plan forward for the other generations, and even my generation, we need to constantly think of the past, of the women who fought the struggle and what we can learn from them, because it is only through them that Priscilla can say, no, Clara, that won't work. That will not work. We've tried it before. It will not take you anywhere. So we need to think of them in mind as we move forward as young women. Thank you.
One, two.
This one is going to be our last intervention.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Paul Dunukomaposa. Baba was saying I'm husband to a woman and a proud feminist. Thank you very much, the panelists, for the deliberations, but I'm also posing a challenge to everybody here. I work in a society where women face a lot of dynamic challenges ranging from cultural, economic, and also socio-political, down in Mashingo there in Pigita. And I believe and hope that these conversations are going to spin from this room to the grassroots, where the women are represented in diversity, and where identities also are unknown in some women. Women need to discover themselves from the grassroots, coming back to the boardroom here, where we are going to celebrate more successes, maybe in 100 years from now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So I want to bring the same question to you, our panelists. What opportunities do you think we can use for the remaining 10 years to accelerate or to realize women's rights? Just in brief. Maybe I can start with you, Namatai.
All right, thank you very much, Tafadzwa. So I think maybe from my perspective, I would actually say that 10 years is not enough. Because we're trying to dismantle a system that has been there for thousands of years. And men have had an unfair head start. They have had the advantage, and it's true. But in terms of the opportunities that exist, I think that the foundation has been laid, and there are people who have done so much, and we need to pick on from what they have done, and then be in a position where we acknowledge that something was done and it exists, and then we begin to put actions that in essence are moving us forward to build onto something. So the first thing I wanted to say is that there is a very strong need for us to redefine how the education system works. We need to feminize our history. We need to feminize our education systems. We need feminist education systems, and we need a feminist lens when it comes to how history is studied. So for the record, I really like the question about how sometimes children come home and they ask you, you know, are there any female heroes or great females in history? Now, on my personal page on Facebook, this Women's Month, I was celebrating the untold stories of very powerful women in history. You talk about Queen Zinga. She was from Angola. She was a military leader in a time when, you know, these were the 1500s, when patriarchy was the thing. But when they realized that there was something different about her, they mentored her into a queen who was a warrior and a military leader. And she was the reason why Portugal was able to withstand 37 years of resistance against Portuguese encroachment. So when she died, the Portuguese still wanted to get at her, but she escaped. And these are the stories that people don't really talk about. You talk about Kimpa Vita, for instance. She was a religious leader. You talk about Nandi Bebe, the mother of Shaka Zulu. You know, when we study her, they just, oh, there was Nandi, and then let's quickly move to Shaka. But she did so much, because in her own right, there was a time when she got pregnant out of wedlock. And the story is that when they were doing the negotiation so that they pay the damages, she was at the forefront demanding that, for me, you're going to pay 40 cows. What you damage, and you're at the so it represents that she was not a woman who could be taken. She could not be, you know, she was not the kind of a woman that you would just brush off. She was a strong woman who raised a strong leader. Everything that Shaka Zulu was because of that woman. But nobody wants to really zero down. You have women like Queen Amina Mohammed of Nigeria. She was a military strategist, a military leader, and led an army of more than 20,000 men. These were warriors, these were military leaders, these were strategists. No one wants us to study that. They want us to study Ofonso, they want us to study Jaja and Nana, they want us to study all but in Africa we had women leaders who were doing that. We need to see that in our school curriculum. When I did my A-level and I studied history, we did not have the stories of these women, which is problematic. Because they were there. Why don't we study the military strategies of Amina Mohammed? We can do that in our curriculum, so that women will grow up knowing that, you know, it's not a new concept where you've got strong women like Sekai Holland or Priscilla Misera. It's not a new concept. It's been there in history, but we just don't talk about it. So the first opportunity comes with our education. The next opportunity comes in our politics. And I can't say this enough. I've had a lot of women's movements who will tell you that let's do away the women's quota and let's just focus on implementing the reforms. I always ask, why don't you do both? Don't remove the women's quota. If you're saying those women are incompetent, you need to put up mechanisms to get competent women. For instance, you can have an elective quota where women actually run for these seats and other women vote for them. So that we have women who are, not to say to remove the whole thing, because there are a lot of incompetent men in parliament, we know this. Too many of them, you know, but you have a few women whom you're saying are incompetent. You don't ask, why don't we preserve this institution and just work on improving to say, how can we get better women through this? Because I think that would be us reversing again as women. And then you have your reforms. You say, oh, let's improve the women's quota and let's also do reforms and implement these reforms and still get women on 50-50 parity. It's more beneficial. So I'm always telling women that in our strategies, we need to be informed enough to say in politics, how do we take more space, which is not cosmetic? How do we make sure that we are not our own enemies and we're reversing our own gains? So this is one thing that I've always said, and I have a very strong question when I see women who say, remove the women's quota. Don't remove it. I think that would be a very big mistake. So in politics, we need to take up space and also find out where the real power is. You need to be in a position where where is the real power? And go for that. Settle for nothing less. And there would be absolutely nothing wrong in us having a government with maybe 70% representation of women. There's nothing wrong with that. I get shocked when women want to select their boards. They will say things like, oh, but we need at least one guy. Do you know that there are boards in this country where there will be 20 men and they are comfortable? So we should be unapologetic about starting our own companies and only having women. You know, we should be unapologetic about that. If we take space and we win space, that's space that we have taken, because there's absolutely nothing wrong in having women who are leading. The final thing that I wanted to say is the great opportunity also lies in economics. Economic emancipation of women, particularly young women, because we make the numbers, is very important. If we don't have money, I want to say this, if we don't have money, whatever political gains, religious gains or whatever, we will be unable to sustain them. I remember listening to Salingube, she's from Women's Coalition, and she talked about this great aunt in her family. When every young man wanted to marry, they would go and ask money from her. So when these young men had problems in their marriages and they're like, no, mkadzi ndila umuramba, she would then say, unoramba mkadzi waka badarira mari. When they were abusing these women, they'll say, no, but unoramba because you didn't pay for that. All right. Now, I'm not for the idea of commodifying women, but she had a voice because she had money. So we as women must find ways of making sure that we get into business and we make our own money. Because men have been able to use capital and capitalism to keep women down. As long as women don't have access to resources that they own, the other issue, ownership. You need to own your means of production. You need to own the capital, the money that you have. Because that way, if you want to run a political campaign, you can finance that. You don't have to go to a man and be abused. Because you are enterprising. So I really liked when she was talking about initiatives where they would teach women how to maybe, get moringa, feed your cat or whatever. It's very important that we have that. And then maybe the final opportunity, like I said, is to also close the distance between generations. We need to interact more with the women who came before us. I can't say this enough. If there is no connectivity in the context of how we interact, then we've got a problem. And it's very easy for us to fight across generations. I know young women who can't just humble themselves and go to women like Sekai, Holland and learn a thing or two. And go to women like Priscilla, because I've had younger women who say things, but I'm like, do you know that some of the things that you are enjoying, it is because she was tortured for you to enjoy that as a woman. Some of the rights that we celebrate in this country as young women, it's because women like them were labeled prostitutes. And people went that far so that we have those rights as young women. So it's important that we sort of go and learn and we close that generational gap. And when we have learned, we define, we create our own space moving forward. And then that way, you have guaranteed that history in itself is preserved, and we honor everyone who has made contributions into whatever we have. But at the very same time, we're able to create what we want as young women in our time, according to what's relevant to us, but in a way that also honors the contributions of those who came before us. I think those would be the opportunities that I want you to just share. Yeah.
I just have 3 points to make. The first one is that every time I'm in a room talking to people, I know I have not got through. The way we've raised our children and our grandchildren is in the context of climate change before it became topical. That should we get up one day and there is a destruction of the planet and 3 of them survive, what is it that they need to be ready to know? So all our kids must do agriculture at home. We've got a big nyeve, mbuya. We have that in our backyard because that grows naturally in Zimbabwe. I don't think that my message has got through to you. I'm not very interested in the Westminster parliamentary system because what were the power structures in Shona culture? What were the power structures in Ndebele culture? If you get to understand them, that's where true democracy lay. In Shona culture, Ushe unotenderera mudzimba, ubukosi buboda ezinjini. In Ndebele culture, you have somebody who is a ruler, but amadoda civili or mama civili in their chambers are the people who drive what goes on. So those 2 systems, nobody during Kopak, during Jomik, during Ondri even bothered to look at. Because in looking at those, when climate change does do what it has to do, is what we are going to go back to. There will be no elections, there will be no Westminster system, and none of people in this room are thinking about what will happen if suddenly climate change does take place. That's where I'm coming from. Number 2, what I want to leave with you. You've given us the women heroes. My women heroes. We met Helen Clark here in October, as I told you. We told her the programs we want to do. She said, don't bother with those things. Have a women's museum. We said, why? She said, but you are telling me about Queen Los Kay, who was a general in the Ndebeles. You're telling about Buyane Handa, who was a general. You're telling about Chifedza. You are telling us, and she just said, have a museum so Zimbabweans, men and women, see themselves. The point I want to make here is, when I went to Australia in 1964, in January, as I got onto the plane, Central African Airways, for Ndola, my mom said, ungakhohlwa ukuthi uvela ngaphi, ukuthi ungubani. My father said, don't be too nervous, because where you are going, kulabantu, there are people where you are going. They've given you a very good scholarship because they want you to be part of their society. So you take your Ubuntu and excel. So I'm saying to you, until you understand that when I say we need to have conversations among ourselves and know who we are, I really mean that we need to go to our roots. People don't believe they have roots. They are there, very long under your feet. What I find when I'm talking to my kids, my grandchildren, they're really annoyed with what I have to say. Now that they're at university and doing all sorts of exciting things, they're really in a hurry to move forward. So I realize that they will understand the lessons when they are now faced with life. My message is, the first rule of African civilization is intergenerational continuity based on connectivity. That's why I say to everybody, go talk to your people. They have the answer. Charity begins at home. All the things that we did don't really matter in the end when the planet is taken out. You will go back to that man and you will be restarting the society where you are going to reproduce and do all those things in the beginning of life. So let's respect what our society did and learn from it for today. When I look at all the things of this girl, Anonzani Uyuoka Chiwenga, the woman, and I hear people laughing, I feel so sad, because what's happening there is a result of a child who was taken to war and did his duty, never got mother love, came back, saw these things when the guerrillas came home, and Takawi Atese stuck with Australia, we'd been sentenced to death and kicked out after the Chitepo death. So I'm saying the guerrillas, when they came, they bought with their money big radios and walked in the streets listening to the radio, things they had not done as children. And we were trying to understand, what is going to be the program to rehabilitate these kids? And the program was done, but he was killed. And it was never done. So Ndrukuti, our society going forward needs to have love in its heart. For our men, for ourselves. We are one. We make life together. Rudo, utando, love. If you don't have that, and you look at Jomik getting into power there, into that, we need to understand what power structures work in Africa. I'm not convinced that the Westminster system works, or having a head of state who is a woman, if that will change anything, because they are pushing a system which is a system that has not brought equality. Kwanai Wakadzi, wake up. We are talking about going back to our roots and really understanding ourselves with our men. They are not the enemy.
A round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much. We've come to the end of this particular segment, but I want to invite Ruarashe Miti to come up to the podium. She's from African Women Leaders Network, and she's going to make a presentation Are you here, Luarashe? Let's give a round of applause.
Mayouth woye. Tine mayouth here muno. Thank you so much for the lovely panel. I really believe in Ubuntu as a young person, but the challenge is most young people, we do not believe in Ubuntu. Good day to you all. My name is Ruvarashe Winnet-Miti, and I'm the founder of an organization called Youth Vibes Africa, where we absolutely believe in keeping the roots alive, which is our Ubuntu, and keeping the vibes lit, which is the youth vibrant. And also at this panel, I'm representing African Women Leaders Network, the Zimbabwean chapter, which has recently launched at the Sustainable Development Regional Forum in Victoria Falls by His Excellency Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa on the 25th of February. So I'm very honored to be on this platform representing young people and also taking this opportunity to actually share the panel with Namatai as well as Mama Holland. I'm also happy to see Madame Priscilla, because everything that we're talking in here, it actually came to fruition when we were at the CSW 62, when we had the Nanga Bint, seated down on the floor, on the cushions, where you were relaxing, telling us your stories. So this is what we want. This is actually a simulation of what we are explaining here. So we can see todzokera back kunanga kuya kwataitaura nyaya dzedu dzevasikana kana kupinda mugota apa vana baba nevana komana pavaitaura. But hey, a lot has been said, and I'm only here to deliver my keynote. So allow me to deliver this keynote. Distinguished panel and the audience present, I am pleased to join you today as we discuss the vital matter of young women leadership in realization of women's rights. This is key to sustainable development and the future we aim for. The Agenda 2030, the Agenda 2063, as well as discussed the Beijing 25. You have heard it from the panel itself. This month we are celebrating women, and we are also celebrating women in Africa, which is a global commemoration that is being done. So let's be proud of who we are as women. As a member of the African Women Leaders Network, which is Holland Zimbabwe chapter, seeing such and witnessing such, I strongly believe that these platforms have been created for us to be a pillar of hope and to be a bridge builder between the senior women and us, the young women. I've also realized the unleashed potential being released of the many millions of women whose contributions have been historically excluded. But now we are making history, and I believe that we are the history makers. Women's rights in Zimbabwe should remain pivotal. Since Zimbabwe is a signatory to the International Human Rights Framework, we should continue to hold our government and ourselves accountable through the various ministries, ensuring the safety of all women in Zimbabwe. And I'm very happy that Tafadzwa, you actually highlighted that Zimbabwe is also a signatory to the Beijing Declaration of 1995, the Protocol of the African Charter on Women's Rights of 2003, and the SADC Protocol on Gender Development of 2008. Definitely this is history that is there. And again, as young women, I allude, we are also going to make our own history. As Holland, we are strongly believing in a peace and social cohesion of sustainable development. So it is the time that we speak and stand firm in making sure that we are holding together the torch. As you have seen, Namatai and my Holland, they have been holding the torch, not passing the baton. As Holland, our main objective is to continue strengthening African women leadership across generations. As I've said, my Holland and Namatai, we seek to transform the norms in Africa toward women and identify avenues that reinforce more intentional, inclusive, and transitional leadership of women in realization of women's rights. We also aim to build a sustainable, innovative, and cross-generational mentorship that will propel emerging and current African women to lead with a network of support from senior women. As a young person, I would also like to speak directly, speaking on behalf of the youth that we have here, be it males, be it females. It has become known that today's generation of young people is the largest that the world has ever known. It is therefore, in particular, a great opportunity to channel the energy, enthusiasm, and innovation that young people embody to accelerate progress towards sustainable development and actually seeing the torch and the bridge being kept. It is therefore essential to embrace young women, the youth in realization of women's rights, significantly the impact that young women have achieved. It is with importance to ensure also the inclusion among young women, girls, boys, people living in poverty, people with disability, and not forgetting the marginalized, and all need to be included, not just according to the principles that have been said here, principles of rights or principles of equality, but because their empowerment, because of the empowerment to unlock a catalytic process of transformation. So right now, Mama Holland, you have actually mentioned about Ubuntu, you have mentioned about Pan-Africanism, you have mentioned about the power matrix, the patriarchy, as also as appreciate one another as young women. Young women, where are we to actually support one another? Because we've been so known to be the PhDs, pull head down. Why are we pulling ourselves down each and every time? The platforms are there, I've been listening. The platforms are so many and they are there. But what are we doing to see these platforms? What are we doing to actually gain these platforms? I remember, I'm very honored to say, I'm a product of Nyaradza Igumbonjanda, the African Union Good Ambassador on Ending Child Marriages. It was only a step that I took from my organization to say, you know what, let me just share it as a story, rather. I was working before at an organization called SRHR Africa Trust. There I was just a volunteer. And I was opportune to say, Ruvarashe, you are going to represent the young people on a workshop on age of consent. And I didn't know Nyaradza Igumbonjanda then. From seeing a program alone, I good her up. And I printed a picture of her in my office. And I said, one day, I'll certainly meet this woman. And indeed, that vision came, that dream came, and I met her. From there, the story has changed. I've been participating in the African Union Summit along the Gender is My Agenda campaign. The platforms have been created, but what are we doing as young people to continue to maximize the platforms that we have? So the question goes back to you young people. The opportunities are there, the mamas are there, the aunties are there, but what are you doing yourself? Not just looking beautiful, not just doing anything, or just loving the core cabin. Most young people, we are now known as being core cabin crews because we love flying and going out, yet not speaking the issues of young people. So this is my sentiments, but I'm saying young people, it's time to take the action because this is the decade of action. Together, let us keep indeed the roots alive, keep the Ubuntu rising, and make 21st century to keep thriving, keeping the vibes lit, and remain holding the torch together, the young and the seniors. It is indeed my take, your take, shape the narrative. I thank you.
A big round of applause to Ruarashe there, powerful, very, very inspiring. Thank you so much, Ruarashe. I wish I was younger so I could do the things that she is doing. Thank you so much. That was really powerful. And I want to invite Itai to come and take this time. We have had an awesome time. I wish we had the whole day. Thank you, Itai.
Thank you so much, Tafadzwa, to distinguished guests. I think one thing that I've learned from this discussion that we've had today is that every generation actually builds on the achievement of the women that were there before. And however, it is also important to know that we have to understand the expectations of the upcoming activists so that we are also on the same path. And I think the dialogue that we have had today has managed to match up those expectations today. And with that note, I think I would like to appreciate your presence here and taking time to be with us. And to Mrs. Holland, it was a mammoth task when I first called you to try to explain everything, and I'm glad that you would take time to be with us today. And Namatai, it's always interesting when we actually have young people taking over and also making sure that they stay at the discussions. And to everyone who has made time to be with us today, it's actually an honor for you to be here and hear your perspectives and what you have to say in terms of making sure that we use the remaining 10 years within the decade of action to ensure that we realize women's rights. One thing that I've also heard from these conversations is that the small actions have big impacts. And as we go away today, I think the conversation starts with the person next to you and they straight to the community, and a lot of us are on social media. And talking about social media, it is my honor also to present to you that as UN Women, we've got a variety of ways in which we can be able to work together in ensuring that we ensure that generation equality is not just a campaign that stays within us, but also translates into the action that is outside of social media. So with that, those few words, I would like to thank everyone for coming to this discussion and taking time to be with us today. And as I would like to inform you that the United Nations Information Center with the Wednesdays, Unique at Wednesdays at Unique, is always open for discussions, and it is always something that you can always approach Tafadzwa so that we can, people are talking about increasing the platforms. This can be a platform where we can always continue with these discussions. I thank you.
So we can take refreshments before we go. Thank you so much.
The really disadvantaged